Well, welcome to the Shift Podcast, where we help leaders and entrepreneurs go to the next level in their business. Matt and I are thrilled. Today, we're going to interview Dr. Alok Singh, a board-certified psychiatrist, entrepreneur, and friend. Dr. Singh brings a unique perspective in combining his experience in medicine, faith, and business. Dr. Alok Singh, thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, and glad you're here. This is it's a cool opportunity for us to sit down at the table together. Because full disclosure, we're friends, right? Like we know each other. We've been going to church together for a long time and all those things. So it's cool to see the intersection of our lives at this point and the different things that we're doing. And I think it's going to make for a great discussion. I want to start off by asking you about this. Board certified psychiatrist. MD, right? You got those letters behind your name, which makes you sound, really higher level than Evan and I, for sure, right? Podcasters. Podcasters compared to an MD. So we've raised the level for you if you're watching or listening right now. But you also have an MBA. So you have this sort of combined, educational background that I think gives you a very unique perspective in this blend of, business and medicine and all of that sort of coming together. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, which came first? Why did you, go both routes? Because a lot of times that would be a divergent path.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that part of your story.
Yeah, well, I started off in the corporate world. So I had almost a decade experience in different corporate positions. I was selling insurance, selling cars. I always had an entrepreneurial, part of me. And
Yeah.
So as I progressed, I was doing really well. But at the same time, I wanted to pursue medicine as well. So I got an MBA in healthcare administration.
Okay.
And that led into me going to medical school and then completing the MD.
Okay.
So I could so that was the pathway to that.
Yeah. So the business side really came first, and then the medical part came later.
Absolutely. I mean, my parents were always in business too. They were in South Korea. They did import export business. So I had a little bit of background in business.
Yeah.
So so I always found that interesting. And it was, I didn't know that it was going to pan out that way where it was going to lead me into medicine.
Yeah.
But then medicine is also a business, right? And there's a lot of folks who do private practice and different aspects of medicine. So it kind of worked really well.
Yeah. It all kind of came together in that way. Well, it's unique because, like you said, physicians, they do run a business in a certain sense, but I would say a lot of them, maybe the business side wouldn't be their strong suit. Right. And so I think when you combine those things, that's probably attributes to some of the success that you've seen in your practice.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, having that mindset is so different when you have an entrepreneurial mindset compared to just, working a 9 to 5.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, part of what you do in your practice is you coach, leaders and business owners and entrepreneurs. And I think because you have that unique perspective, like you're approaching it from both the psychiatry side of things, as well as you have the business insight.
Yep.
Talk about how that sort of plays out in terms of your consulting with those business owners.
Yeah, I think I have a unique insight because, I have a cumulative experience of almost 20 years, 10 years in medicine, 10 years in the corporate world. Okay. So when it comes to, and I look at myself more as an advisor for entrepreneurs,
okay,
because I feel like there's, of course, maybe not, I don't consult them more on the business side, but what I do is I help them have emotional transformation that leads to their bottom line increasing. So I feel like I could cover more bases, by having both of that experience.
Okay. So you use an interesting phrase there, emotional transformation.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. I want to dig into that because, on the surface, I think a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs would almost want to stay away from emotions, right? Like I've got to put my head down. I've got to grind. I don't have time for emotions. Emotions are a distraction. Of course, what we know is that that's not true, right? Like having healthy emotional life affects everything. But talk about like that kind of that side of things. What does emotional transformation look like? How does that play out for an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So, emotions play out in a very interesting way. I mean, you have to be mindful of your emotions. You have to know what you're feeling, but at the same time, you need to know how to go beyond those emotions, right? For example, like if I'm working out, I might not feel like I want to work out, but I know that if you just force yourself to do it, it'll be beneficial. Same thing comes with business. There's certain things or certain days that you might not want to go ahead and you might not want to grind. When you're an entrepreneur, basically you get to determine your own schedule.
Right.
And that's why it's important to go beyond your emotions. One of the strategies I teach is how to overcome those emotions.
Yeah.
And, I'll be writing a little bit about that in my upcoming book. But yeah, it's definitely an important, essential piece of thing that you have to overcome. So.
Yeah. Well, you're right. It's the interesting, the both sides of the coin, right? When you're an entrepreneur and you can control your own schedule and you have freedom, that can be a huge positive or a huge negative, depending on your emotional makeup and your self-discipline and all of those things. Right. So from your perspective, you talked about maybe overcoming emotion. Yeah. So there's this line, right, where we would say in some cases our emotions are empowering us, and in some ways maybe they're a hindrance to us or they're an obstacle. How do you sort of go about navigating which part of the emotional makeup is helpful and which is maybe, I don't want to say harmful, but kind of becomes a stumbling block?
Yeah, so that's a $1 million question, right? So
that's why people come to you.
Yeah, so let me give you a little background. So I've had the privilege of serving at this point, I think a couple thousand clients over the last decade.
Okay.
And I've gleaned a lot of wisdom from my clinical experience, my medical experience, even my own past experiences and trauma.
Yeah.
One thing that I can take credit for is the principles that I teach. And the reason for that is I didn't come up with them.
Okay.
They've been working from the beginning of time. And the nice thing is when they're applied, I know that they'll bring entrepreneurs peace.
Yeah.
So what I focus on is I focus on taking entrepreneurs through like an inner healing, like a deep journey of healing.
Yeah.
And one of the first, and I'd say probably the most important principle that I teach is, discovering your identity.
Okay.
Okay. Because from your identity stems your mindset, it stems your limiting beliefs.
Yep.
Aside from that, some of the other core principles that I would say that I incorporate into my strategy is, like I said, we talked about overcoming emotions, navigating through detours.
Yeah.
Right. Another one is, this is not so much thought of as a strategy, but it's very important, which is letting go of unforgiveness.
Yeah.
Right. And the last main one that I usually teach is how to practice gratitude.
Okay.
So when you start to work on all these aspects of your life, I feel that your bottom line will increase as you improve.
Yep.
But you're right. The process to do that it's a little bit challenging.
Right. Yeah. So it's obviously not something you can just give people a 3-step, follow steps 1, 2, 3 on this podcast and you'll be all good to go.
Right. So it's definitely, they're simple concepts, but they're not easy. Right.
Yeah.
And I know you gentlemen have heard of that phrase or the Bible verse, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he.
Yeah.
Right. The problem is that most folks don't actively think. I would say that most people accept the label that's been placed on their life from either their friends or loved ones. So maybe if you're grown up hearing, oh, you're a loser, you're never going to amount to anything. Sometimes you embrace that and then you just don't go beyond that, right? Or some folks might, come from maybe an ethnic background where they say, listen, you can't get that far because of the color of your skin, right? So that puts some challenges on you as well.
So is it mindset?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's your mindset, right? So, and then there's now another aspect of folks that they don't accept the label, but what they do is they identify their identity with their occupation.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
So when you ask them, like, who are you?
Yep.
The first thing that comes to mind, you might say, oh, I'm a business owner or I'm a doctor or, whatever you do. The problem with that is that life is transient, right? So one day you might be in that profession, one day you might run that business, but the next day your business might not run anymore. So what do you do?
Right. If your identity is completely wrapped up in that.
If your identity is completely linked in your occupation, then you're going to be stuck in a pickle.
Yeah.
Right. So as men of faith, we know that we need to ground and anchor our identity into something that's not going to change. Right. So for us, we're men of faith. So we know that, for that, that's our identity in Christ.
Yep.
Right. As a child, we know that, we're chosen, we're loved, and there's certain things that are set into motion. So we could come from that identity. Now, what do you do if you're not a person of faith? You're like, I'm just a business owner. I don't really care about religion. Well, even in that circumstance, you still can benefit from adapting new ways of thinking. In psychology, we call it, replacing your maladaptive thoughts.
Yep.
Through a process of cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you meet with a therapist, they could help you replace some maladaptive thoughts with the right thinking. So that could also help you shift your identity, shift your mindset.
Yeah.
But like I said, for men of faith, we know the ultimate truth is really, basing your identity in Christ. So,
Yeah.
If let's say there's a scenario, right? A business owner, entrepreneur comes to you, and they are in this transition, trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
What are some sort of red flags or things that you see that are really, really common in your patients? No one in particular, obviously, but maybe something that's hung them up is really caused them to plateau.
Yeah. So a lot of things can make folks plateau. I think, I think some people just keep grinding and they keep working hard, even though they're successful.
Okay.
Right. So that could be a trigger that there's some unresolved trauma from the past or unresolved issues where, you're just overcompensating for certain things, right? So maybe you have a chip on your shoulder. You're just trying to do well, so that way, you could prove a point to your family.
Sure.
But that only gets you so far.
Yep.
I mean, that's not healthy because, it's at the end of the day, nobody cares. Even if you drive a nice car or if you get successful, the next person is not really going to care about that as much as you do.
Right.
So you have to. What it comes down to is not having your why. Not knowing why you do what you do.
Okay.
Right. And I think the other pitfall that folks have a plateau in is they don't have a vision. So they don't know where they're headed.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So sort of like living moment by moment, putting out fires, not having a vision for their life or family or their life or business.
Yeah. Well, it's impossible to really, go somewhere where you don't know where you're going. Right?
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
You're just driving and you just so you have to have an end goal in mind. Like, why are you doing this business? What's the purpose of it? What's the end goal?
Yeah.
That vision.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think that's one of those pitfalls. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So if you are watching or listening, already in the first, 10 minutes or so of this episode, we're getting into some deep stuff, right? Like this is heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Identity and purpose and vision. These aren't things that most entrepreneurs and business owners wake up thinking about every day, right? Because I wake up and I've got the to-do list and I've got the meetings and I've got the emails and all of that. But these are things that are so foundational because, like you said, they can grind for a long time, and it seems like everything is going okay on the surface. Maybe the business is even growing. Maybe I'm financially, successful, and then all of a sudden something starts to crack, something starts to break in my life, right? And I'm sure you're seeing people sometimes that are coming into your practice. You're seeing patients come to you. Well, I don't know. I'm making an assumption, so I'll back up and say, are people coming to you because they're aware of the need for improvement, or are they coming to you because of crisis?
Good question.
Both. So I'd say this is how, I see a lot of, I've worked with high-level entrepreneurs, CEOs, doctors, lawyers. The one thing they all had in common is that their past emotional traumas, it manifested for them usually as anxiety or depression or anger issues.
Okay.
So by the time they present to me, they're doing it because their spouse or their coworkers have said, listen, you need to get help. Like, you're doing well, or you're, too high sprung, you're affecting your employees, you're affecting your marriage. And so that's how it usually presents.
Okay.
It's hard to recognize things in yourself.
Yeah, of course.
But when folks around you start to say, hey, listen, you're a little bit on edge, like, you're maybe drinking a little bit too much or doing certain things that are not productive or not helpful.
Yeah, coping mechanisms and things like that. Yeah. So then for the most part, by the time they come to you, there's a problem. It's not like, hey, everything's fine, I'm just coming in just to make sure. It's, hey, there's something that's presenting. I've got some acute issue here that needs to be dug up a little bit.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a problem. And also at the same time, sometimes, folks have tried a lot of things before. They've tried medications. They've tried, practices that the therapist has told them about, mindfulness or practicing yoga and different things, but yet they still feel like there's a limitation on them. If you're like, they're stuck and they feel like, why can't I get to the next level?
Yep.
So that's when they reach out to me.
Yeah. Okay.
Love to spend a minute talking about burnout. right? Because so many entrepreneurs experience it. So can you tell us just real quick how you take someone through either avoiding it or recovering from it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Burnout is definitely real. And I think for everybody, there's different levels, right? Some people like to work. For example, I love to work. So for me to slow down, even on a vacation, it's very hard. It's difficult for me to wind down.
Yeah.
So I'll notice it in myself. I'll be more irritable, more grumpy, when I'm not taking those breaks.
Yeah.
So what I always recommend folks is do the simple things first, right? It's always self-care.
Sure.
Right? Taking care of your health, working out. But more than that, take those breaks, right? And, even if you look from the biblical standpoint, having that Sabbath, having one day where you're just resting and not doing anything else work related, I think is so important for burnout. Now, I think, we live in Colorado, so, everybody here loves the, what do you call it? The lifestyle.
Right.
Town, right? They're all about lifestyle. So I think, I think most folks, they probably don't work as hard as they think they're working, right? Because you might be working 10 hours a day, but you're not productive. Right. And in that 10 hours a day, you might be like scrolling and shopping. And I'm guilty of that too. And, so I would say that the hours that you put in are probably not that productive. But I would say that if you do like a solid work week, which I think is if you're an entrepreneur, you probably need to work at least 6 days a week, but then rest a 7th day. And take those scheduled breaks. I think that will help with burnout.
Yep.
So,
yeah.
But for everybody, that's different. For somebody, you might work 4 days a week really hard and you feel like, you know what, you need to take a little break. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, too.
So that's interesting. Diving into that piece specifically, schedule, hours worked, hours versus, total hours versus productive hours and all of that. Yeah. Give us some insight on that, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs, and we live in a culture where really there's kind of this like black and white, right? Like there's influencers that are telling us we better grind 100 hours a week if we're going to make our business successful. And then you have the sort of the Tim Ferriss 4-hour work week, in 90 days, you'll be a millionaire and you can lay on the beach, right? And like, we know both of those extremes are probably unhealthy. Yeah. But from your perspective, with, as a business owner, but then, coaching business owners, where is that crossover line of, you're working more hours, but they're not better. Like the quantity is higher, but quality is lower. How do we sort of navigate some of that? What are some signs that we might want to adjust, even our schedules or our work weeks based on that?
Yeah, the best way I think would be what I recommend is, prioritizing whatever needs to be done. The things that you don't want to do are probably the things that are most important to get done.
Interesting.
Right. So, if you put those on the top of your list and you knock those out first, it's going to make the whole day easier. And I would say that if you just block off some time where you're just doing that, focus on one thing at a time, and then move on to the next task, that's probably the best thing you could do. I think focus time, you could really grind it out. Because I remember when I was a teenager, I had some data entry jobs. I was just sitting there literally typing on the keyboard all day long for like 8 hours. And I literally knocked out all my work in 30 minutes. Yeah. So the rest of the day, you're just wasting time. So that's how most 9-to-5 jobs are. But as entrepreneurs, sometimes we translate that into our business because we're used to the 9-to-5 grind.
Yeah, we've been trained.
And most of us were employees before we became entrepreneurs. Right. So you've been conditioned to do a certain way, but you don't have to do that. So
the busy work, right? Yes, doing the busy work.
Just doing the busy work. So I would say, just having a list of priorities, putting the number one things first, and then knocking those out. And then the other things are just secondary. But another thing that I do is, and I'm sure both of you have so many things going on too. Yeah. When something comes to you, just knock it out right away. I mean, don't give it any chance for procrastination, because you can't afford to do it, because now you have to use more of your mental space to go back and think of what you're missing.
Yep.
But if you just knocked it out, you move on and you're clearing up your mental memory for that.
Okay. So. Yeah. All right. So that's a interesting perspective, because I've heard it referred to that way, right? Like if you think of your brain as like the computer, right? Like the RAM is running, right? So it's like every one of these new things can take up more and more space if it's not just knocked out, crossed off the list, and done.
Exactly.
So you're sort of, I think, kind of posturing that for our mental health, this is actually a good thing too, right? Because otherwise our mind's going to sort of get continually clouded and cluttered with all of these sort of unfinished open loops and all of that.
Yeah. Not only is it good, I think it's, it's fulfilling too, because when you start knocking off tasks, it's encouraging to you too.
Yeah.
You feel good that, hey, I'm getting my work done.
Yep.
A lot of folks that I work with who have ADHD, one of their complaints or one thing that gives them anxiety is their inability to complete tasks.
Yep.
So as things pile up, it seems more and more overwhelming. And then you get to the point where you just give up.
Yeah.
You're like,
Right.
forget it.
Yep.
I'm just going to go to sleep or watch Netflix.
Right. Yeah. I'm just going to binge watch, binge
watch.
eat, binge drink, whatever it is. Yeah. Because I just can't handle it. Yeah.
So that would be the main thing I would recommend for that.
Yeah. Okay. A minute ago, you talked about self-care and you threw out a few things, diet and exercise and taking breaks and things like that. It seems to me, my observation is you really have two camps of entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. They're the entrepreneurs who they build their life in such a way that they have time to do all of that. Like, that's why I own a business. I can control my own schedule. If I need to take, a total of 2 hours or 3 hours a day to do all of those things to maintain mental health, physical health, all of that, then I'm going to do it and I prioritize it. Right. And the other camp of people are like, I have to work 80 hours to even make this business successful, which means I have to eat fast food. I don't have time to work out. Like none of all that gets pushed to the side. And it feels like there's almost no in between, right? Like it's a very
Sometimes
black, yeah. It's almost a binary thing. How unhealthy is it really? Like have we overemphasized, the morning routine and all of that, or is there really a value to it? Are there times you just have to grind and put all of that to the side? How long can you get away with it, before it bites you in the butt? Yeah. What's some perspective on, maybe bringing a balance to all of that?
Yeah. So I would say, not everybody falls into the cookie cutter, recommendations. Everybody's different. Everybody's circumstance. Like you said, there's folks that have established businesses. Now you have a full team. Everything's automated and you have the privilege, you have the benefit of, really making your own schedule and doing whatever you want that day. So of course you have a lot more flexibility, but for that entrepreneur that's starting out, of course, you're going to have to put in a lot of hours. So what I would say is doing the simple things will really go a long way. So let me say what the simple things are. The simple thing is drinking enough water, right? Yeah. If you're working at a desk, most entrepreneurs, most jobs, I think these days, you could work off a computer, right? Sure. So I'll give you a setup of what I do. I have a standing desk. Okay. And I have a cheap treadmill under there. Yeah. So as I'm working, I'm walking. Yeah. Right? So it's not that I'm taking time away. I'm not doing things after hours. I'm just doing it, vice versa. So that's one thing you could do. Another thing you could do is just, even if you have to have fast food, maybe condense it down to like once a day, right? You don't have to have it 3 times a day. Right. Right. So
you get the grilled chicken instead of the fried chicken.
Right. The grilled chicken. You get the egg white grill for Chick-fil-A, right? For breakfast instead of
the side salad instead of the fries. Right. Yeah.
So there's a lot of things you could do. You could really change your diet, eat more protein. But I think so this is the thing. The thing is, if you sacrifice your health for the business, you're not going to be optimal. Yeah. Right? So, even with the mental health piece, you want to optimize every single area of your life, emotional, spiritual, and physical. Yeah. And then that's what's going to help you increase anyway. Okay. But I think if you just put in the hours, you are going to burn out. And at some point, it's not going to be productive.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, I think it's the idea that, if you, especially if you're in, if you're the business owner, you are the entrepreneur, you're the point person. Right. If you break down mentally or physically or spiritually or whatever, everything's going to break down, right? And so, yes, there's seasons where you got to go all in and do what you got to do. But I think long term, zoom out. If you don't stay healthy, everything is going to tend toward unhealth at some point.
Exactly. And another thing you could do is build buffers in your life, right? So if you need to grind it out for a couple of months, that's okay. Just build some cash reserves. And then you work your way backwards. Okay. Right. So, but what happens is if you're used to working that many hours as an entrepreneur, sometimes you just like to work that long.
Right. Yeah.
You get used to it.
Yeah. Okay. So
that's my problem.
So this is interesting, right? You talked earlier in the episode about, our identity being tied up in the work. Right. So what's the difference between my identity's tied up in the work, which is why I'm working the hours, versus I just love what I do?
Well, so I'll give you an example. I'll give you a biblical example, right? If you ask Jesus, who are you? Imagine he answered, I'm a carpenter. No, you're not a carpenter, buddy. You're more than that, right?
Right.
So, so that the difference is the job and your work. We all have our job, which might be our business. It might be, your job. And that's what you do to pay your bills. That's your 9 to 5. But then there's another aspect of work, which is what you're created for, what you enjoy doing, even if you don't get paid, right?
Okay.
So I would say that if you can mix both, if you could get to the point where your work and your job is one, I mean, that's the sweetest combination of things, right?
I love that.
And I think that should be the goal for everybody is, once they're at a point where they're managing their finances, get into their work. And I think that will be more fulfilling.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I love that you bring that up, because I think that really is, when your sense of purpose and passion and proficiency all, come together,
Right.
I think that's where you find the greatest fulfillment, right? Remember, it was Steve Harvey that said, career is what you're paid for, but calling is what you're made for.
Right. Nice.
And I love that idea. And yeah, I think for maybe not everybody gets, has that opportunity,
Right.
but I think for more people, if they could figure out a way that those things come together, at least on some level,
Right.
Man, there's so much more fulfillment in a life like that.
Right. There is. I mean, Solomon puts it this way, he's like, go sow your seeds in the morning, and then at night, he's like, continue to work. I forget the exact verse.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. Basically, you go in the morning to work and you fulfill your requirements, your duties for your household. And then afterwards, you work on your passion project. Right.
Yeah.
Hopefully one day your passion project turns into your main thing. And that's what's happening for me too, where, my advisement business is going to be, one day it's going to take over, and I just go full time in that.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
Love it.
Yeah.
There's this common notion that people who have been through child trauma, right? Whether it's this story of immigration or a story of just coming from a hard life, that they make really good entrepreneurs, right? So do you think that this is true? Is there any validity to that at all?
So, I could tell you firsthand, because I come from that background. I come from emotional trauma. So, I come from a broken family. My mother left at the age of 12. So we went through a lot of different things. So, but this is what I would say. I would say that I wouldn't wish any emotional trauma on anybody.
Yeah.
Right. So ideally, it's best to not have it. But just because you have emotional trauma doesn't necessarily mean, it's not necessarily going to translate into you being a better entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And the reason I say this is, the one thing that they, that it's very popular these days is the word resilience. Right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
they'll say trauma leads to resilience. Well, resilience just means bouncing back. Now, if you bounce back to a state that's already flawed, that's not really that beneficial.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
So you don't want to just bounce back strong. No, you don't want to just be guarded. You want to use those skills and translate them into a healthy entrepreneur. So as I'm writing my book, I'm doing research on Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
And he had a tumultuous childhood as well. I mean, his mother died early. His sons died.
Yeah.
Wow. And so for him, the reason why I think he was so anti-slavery was because he was compassionate towards people suffering. They said that majority of his life he spent in a state of melancholy. He was depressed for most of his life. So he had a special appreciation for somebody who's suffering. So I would say, yes, you can use it, but it's not necessary. And there's two things that can happen. If you take two people with the same type of trauma, one person might grow from that and become strong and say, listen, I'm not going to stay stuck in this. I'm going to use this as motivation to get better and move forward. But the other person might remain bitter and guarded and have a different trajectory for their life. Now, what I would say is what makes the difference between both of these folks and their outcomes is who they surround themselves with.
That's good.
I would say the mentors and the support system that they have makes the biggest difference.
Yeah.
If they're humble enough to allow that.
Yeah. You mentioned what you bounce back to. And the way I understood that is, let's say someone does experience burnout, right? And you help them with that burnout. What they bounce back to would be the same mindset of, I have to grind, I have to make this work because of what's happened to me, right? Which is just this perpetuous, system, right? What are some things that you can talk to the audience about? How can we bounce back to the right place and start right?
No, that's good. Yeah. One of the ways that I would say is that you have to realize that you don't need to do everything yourself, right? Finding the support system, getting the right mentors in place, having the right team is going to alleviate a lot of that, right? As entrepreneurs, I think we get into the mindset that, you know what, if it needs to get done, I'm going to do it.
Right.
Right. If it needs to get done right, I need to be the one doing it. Right. And it's really hard to delegate things. I know I have a problem with that. I can't delegate. I have hard, I struggle with that myself. But if you just delegate tasks to other folks, it'll buy back your time.
Right.
And now you can feel, now you can focus on what matters most, which is growing your business, re-strategizing, being innovative, and moving forward in that direction. So I'd say that would be the biggest thing is, buying back your time and getting the right supports in place.
Yeah. And we talk about delegation and the importance of having a team that helps you do things all the time.
Yeah.
It's really good.
And focusing on the things that actually matter for the business, because like you said, we can feel like it all rests on us. And there might be a phase of business, where you're totally just solopreneur, where you don't have a choice. But yeah, I think the goal is to get to the point where you can begin delegating those things. But there's a difference between I can and I'm not willing to. Right. And I think that's the hard part, right?
That's the hard part.
Yeah. And I think having an accurate assessment of what are the unique skills and abilities that I have as the business owner that really these are essential. I have to do these things because that's what makes the business what it is.
Right.
But that's not the majority of the tasks that have to get done, right? Like, I mean, in your practice, you can't necessarily, outsource, the psychiatric care. You can if you build a team of other psychiatrists, they're working with you. But in terms of your direct client care, your patient care, you can't do that. But there's a whole bunch of other things you could, right? Like you can only spend so much time posting your own social media stuff, tinkering with your own website, all of those things. Even if you're good at it, even if you enjoy it, it's not the thing that's, that's not the rainmaking for the business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while we're on the subject of grinding and doing everything, we talk about how important it is as a business owner, as they mature as an entrepreneur, to not do everything, which causes this burnout and this grind mentality. You're no longer, we said this in another episode, you're no longer the hardest working employee, or you're no longer the person who puts in the most hours. You're now the architect of the business.
That's right.
And I think listening to you and hearing these things is going to help people make that shift.
Yeah, no, I hope so. Yeah, I just want to add one more thing. I think, sometimes, it's just pride, right? It's pride because if you feel like you're self-made, you're not. Sorry to be so blunt about it, but you're not. So I think when you want to do everything, you're kind of saying, no, I'm the only one that could do it. No, you can't. There's other people that could do things. They might not do it as good as you, but you do need them.
Man, that's so good.
And it's the pride. And that's why I say humbling yourself makes you realize, no, you know what? It is going to be a team effort. And I need folks on our team to get this done. Evan might be better at something that I'm not, and I might be better than something they
sure.
Right.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I think realizing that is something that keeps you humble.
Yeah. It's funny because I think all entrepreneurs probably carry a little bit of that. And, you want to put it like in enough of a context to say, like, you got to have a little bit of ego to start a business. And there's a certain amount of self-assuredness, self-confidence. That's not a bad thing. Right. And exactly where the line is, who knows, but we know when we've crossed over to being prideful or arrogant or whatever. But I always just think about the fact that, man, no matter how good you are at something, there's 8 billion people on the planet. Like there's probably somebody better at everything, right? Like when you get right down to it. And so I think figuring out like what's your unique contribution to your business, because it might not be that you're the best at any particular thing.
Right.
It might just be that you have the vision for putting it all together.
Right.
You've got the strategy that understands how these components interact with each other or whatever. We've all got something to bring to the table. And I think it's just having a healthy sort of self-awareness around that that's really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. You want to be confident, but you don't want to be overconfident.
Absolutely. Yeah. Overconfident is where you lose and you don't see it coming. Right. Yeah.
Well, look, I just want to say thanks so much for taking your time, man, and sharing with the audience.
It's good stuff.
I've learned several things. I've already taken my own notes that I'm going to walk away with.
This is kind of like his therapy session for you and I on the podcast.
He doesn't know that.
Right. I'll bill you later. Don't worry.
Exactly.
And what?
Right.
He's like, I got your email.
Right. No, I mean, you're right. These are such good things to talk about. And, we could probably rap all day about this, but it's not the Joe Rogan podcast. So we are going to, we'll start landing the plane here. Right. Yeah.
Well, we just want to say thanks again. This is good stuff. What else can we do for you? Like, how can people hear about you? What do you want to say to the audience before we wrap?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It was a It was a great time, and I'm hopeful that it helped a lot of you today as well. If you want to know more, you want to learn more, you could definitely go over to my website at draloksingh.com. That's DRALOKSINGH.com. In the next couple of months, I'm going to be releasing my first book, which is going to be titled Profit from Pain, Turning Trauma into Triumph.
Wow.
And I want to encourage you to sign up. You'll get notified when we release that. Another thing is if you resonated with anything that you heard today and you feel like you want to take a deeper dive or you want to work with me and my team, you could go ahead and fill out the form on my website, and we'll love to connect with you through that. But
yeah, that's great. And we'll make sure that all of those links are in the show notes. So if you're, download the show notes and you can get all those links to be able to connect with Alok. Man, so great to do this and to sit down. I'm excited about the book. So I was going to ask when it's coming out. So a few months.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just working on the final touches, and it's going to be published within a few months.
Okay, that's fantastic. I'm looking forward to that, and I'm sure we'll that'll give us even more material to talk about on the podcast as well. So, Alok, thanks so much for being with us today. And Evan, any final thoughts from you?
No, I just want to say, hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Shift Podcast. As usual, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.